On our way back home we were caught in a shower of rain and took shelter under an olive tree, waiting for it to pass. I sat with my back against the trunk and smoked a cigarette. Balthazar sat cross-legged on the ground and scratched designs in the earth with a twig. He wore heavy boots and coarse woolen trousers. His new beard was uneven, dense around his mouth and throat, skimpy on his cheeks. His hair was uncombed and greasy. The smell of the rain falling on the dry earth was strong, sour and ferrous, like old cellars. That night we lay side by side in bed, hot and exhausted. I slipped my hands in the creases beneath my breasts and drew them out, my fingers moist and slick. I scratched my neck. I could smell the sweat on my body. I turned. Balthazar was sitting up, one knee raised, the sheet flung off him, his shoulders against the wooden headboard. On his side of the bed was an oil lamp set on a stool. A small brown moth fluttered crazily around it, its big shadow bumping on the ceiling. I felt a sudden, huge contentment spill through me. My bladder was full and was aching slightly, but with the happiness came a profound lethargy that made the effort required to reach below the bed for the enamel chamber pot prodigious. I reached out and touched Balthazar's thigh. "You can go tomorrow," he said, "if you want." "No, I'll stay on," I said instantly, without thinking. "I'm enjoying myself. I'm glad I'm here." I hauled myself up to sit beside him. "I want to see you in Lisbon," I said, taking his hand. "No, I'm afraid not." "Why?" "Because after tomorrow you will never see Balthazar Cabral again." From this meagre description we now at least have some idea of what corkwood is, and have some indication of the constant care necessary to ensure a successful gathering or harvest, while admitting that the narration in no wise does justice to this most interesting material. We shall now turn to examine it more closely and see what it really is, how this particular formation comes about, and its peculiarities. Consul Schenk's report. Boscan. One of my mental problems rather, and how can I convince you of its effect, horrible, horrible beyond words, is my deep and abiding fear of insanity. Of course, it goes without saying, such a deep fear of insanity is insanity itself. I saw nothing of Boscan for a full year. Having left my employ, he then, I believe, became a freelance translator, working for any firm that would give him a job, and not necessarily in the cork industry. Then came Christmas 1933, and another invitation arrived, written on a thick buff card with decal edges in a precise italic hand in violet ink. "Signora Campendonk, do me the favor of spending the festive season in my company. I shall be staying at the Avenida Palace Hotel, rooms 35, 38, from the 22nd to the 26th of December inclusive. Your devoted admirer, J. Melchior Vasconcelos. P.S. Bring many expensive clothes and scents. I have jewels." Boscan's suite in the Avenida Palace was on the 4th floor. The bellhop referred to me as Signora Vasconcelos. Boscan greeted me in the small vestibule and made the bellhop leave my cases there. Boscan was dressed in a pale grey suit. His face was thinner, clean-shaven, and his hair was sleek, plastered down on his head with macassar. In his shiny hair I could see the stiff furrows made from the teeth of the comb. When the bellhop had gone, we kissed. I could taste the mint from his mouthwash on his lips. Boscan opened a small leather suitcase. It was full of jewels, paste jewels, rhinestones, strings of artificial pearls, diamant brooches, and marcasite baubles. This was his plan, he said. This Christmas our gift to each other would be a day. I would dedicate a day to him, and he one to me. "Today you must do everything I tell you," he said. "Tomorrow is yours." "All right," I said, "but I won't do everything you tell me to, I warn you." "Don't worry, Lily. I will ask nothing indelicate of you." "Agreed. What shall I do?" "All I want you to do is to wear these jewels." The suite was large, a bathroom, 2 bedrooms, and a capacious sitting room. Boscan Vasconcelos kept the curtains drawn day and night. In one corner was a free-standing cast-iron stove that one fed from a wooden box full of coal. It was warm and dark in the suite. We were closed off from the noise of the city. We could have been anywhere. We did nothing. Absolutely nothing. I wore as many of his cheap trinkets as my neck, blouse, wrists, and fingers could carry. We ordered food and wine from the hotel kitchen, which was brought up at regular intervals, Vasconcelos himself collecting everything in the vestibule. I sat and read in the electric gloom, my jewels winking and flashing merrily at the slightest shift of position. Vasconcelos smoked short, stubby cigars and offered me fragrant oval cigarettes. The hours crawled by. We smoked, we ate, we drank. For want of anything better to do, I consumed most of a bottle of champagne and dozed off. I awoke, fuzzy and irritated, to find Vasconcelos had drawn a chair up to the sofa I was slumped on, and was sitting there, elbows on knees, chin on fists, staring at me. He asked me questions about the business, what I had been doing in the last year, had I enjoyed my trip home to England, had the supply of cork from Elvas improved, and so on. He was loquacious. We talked a great deal, but I could think of nothing to ask him in return. J. Melchior Vasconcelos was, after all, a complete stranger to me, and I sensed it would put his tender personality under too much strain to inquire about his circumstances and the fantastical life he led. All the same, I was very curious, knowing Boscan as I did. "This suite must be very expensive," I said. "Oh, yes, but I can afford it. I have a car outside, too, and a driver. We could go for a drive." "If you like." "It's an American car, a Packard." "Wonderful." That night, when we made love in the fetid bedroom, he asked me to keep my jewels on. "It's your day today." "Thank you. Merry Christmas." "And the same to you. What do you want me to do?" "Take all your clothes off." I made Vasconcelos remain naked for the entire day. It was at first amusing and then intriguing to watch his mood slowly change. Initially he was excited sexually and regularly aroused. But then, little by little, he became self-conscious and awkward. Later still, he grew irritable and restless, pacing up and down, not content to sit and talk out the hours as we had done the day before. In mid-afternoon, I put on a coat and went out for a drive, leaving him behind in the suite. The big Packard was there, as he had said, and a driver. I had him drive me down to Estoril and back. I was gone for almost 3 hours. When I returned, Vasconcelos was asleep, lying on top of the bed in the hot bedroom. He was deeply asleep, his mouth open, his arms and legs spread. His chest rose and fell slowly, and I saw how very thin he was, his skin stretched tight over his ribs. When I looked closely, I could see the shiver and bump of his palpitating heart. Before dinner, he asked me if he could put on his clothes. When I refused his request, it seemed to make him angry. I reminded him of our gifts and their rules. But to compensate him, I wore a tight sequined gown, placed his flashy rings on my fingers, and roped imitation pearls around my neck. My wrists tickled and clattered with preposterous rhinestone bangles. So we sat and ate, me, Lily Campendonk, splendid in my luminous jewels, and across the table J. Melchior Vasconcelos, surly and morose, picking at his Christmas dinner, a crisp linen napkin spread modestly across his thighs. The various applications of cork that we are now going to consider are worthy of description, as each application has its raison d'être in one or more of the physical or chemical properties of this marvelous material. Cork possesses three key properties that are unique in a natural substance. They are impermeability, elasticity, and lightness. Consul Schenk's report. I missed Boscan after this second Christmas with him much more, strangely, than I had after the first. I was very busy in the factory that year, 1934, as we were installing machinery to manufacture Kamptulikon, a soft, unresounding cork carpet made from cork powder and India rubber, and much favoured by hospitals and the reading rooms of libraries. My new manager, a dour, reasonably efficient fellow called Pimentel, saw capably to most of the problems that arose, but refused to accept any responsibility for all but the most minor decisions. As a result, I was required to be present whenever anything of significance had to be decided, as if I functioned as a symbol of delegatory power, a kind of managerial chaperone. I thought of Boscan often, and many nights I wanted to be with him. On those occasions, as I lay in bed dreaming of Christmases past, and, I hoped, Christmases to come, I thought I would do anything he asked of me, or so I told myself. One evening at the end of April, I was leaving a shop on the Rua Conciliacio, where I had been buying a christening present for my sister's second child, when I saw Boscan enter a cafe, the Trinidad. I walked slowly past the door and looked inside. It was cramped and gloomy, and there were no women clients. In my glimpse, I saw Boscan leaning eagerly across a table, around which sat half a dozen men, showing them a photograph. At first they peered at it frowning, and then they broke into wide smiles. I walked on agitated, this moment frozen in my mind's eye. It was the first time I had seen Boscan and Boscan's life separate from myself. I felt unsettled and oddly envious. Who were these men? Friends or colleagues? I wanted suddenly and absurdly to share in that moment of the offered photograph, to frown and then grin conspiratorially like the others. I waited outside the Trinidad, sitting in the back of my motor car with the windows open and the blinds down. I made Giulio, my old chauffeur, take off his peaked cap. Boscan eventually emerged at about 7:45 and walked briskly to the tramway centre at the Rocchio. He climbed aboard a number 2, which we duly followed, until he stepped down from it near São Vicente. He set off down the steep alleyways into the Muraria. Giulio and I left the car and followed him discreetly down a series of bucario, dim and noisome streets that led down to the Tagus. Occasionally there would be a sharp bend, and we would catch a glimpse of the wide, sprawling river shining below in the moonlight, and beyond the scatter of lights from Almada on the southern bank. Boscan entered through the door of a small, decrepit house. The steps up to the threshold were worn and concave. The tiles above the porch were cracked and slipping. A blurry yellow light shone from behind drab lace curtains. Giulio stopped a passer-by and asked who lived there. Signor Boscan, he was told, with his mother and 3 sisters. Mrs. Campendonk. Mr. Boscan. I sat down opposite him. When the surprise and shock began to leave his face, I saw that he looked pale and tired. His fingers touched his bow tie, his lips, his earlobes. He was smoking a small cigar, chocolate brown, and wearing his old blue suit. Mrs. Campendonk, this is not really a suitable establishment for a lady. I wanted to see you. I touched his hand, but he jerked it away as if my fingers burned him. It's impossible. I'm expecting some friends. Are you well? You look tired. I miss you. His gaze flickered around the cafe. How is the Kamptulikon going? Pimentel is a good man. Come to my house this weekend. Mrs. Campendonk. His tone was despairing. Call me Lily. He steepled his fingers. I'm a busy man. I live with my mother and 3 sisters. They expect me home in the evening. Take a holiday. Say you're going to Spain for a few days. I only take 1 holiday a year. Christmas. They go to my aunt. I stay behind to look after the house. A young man approached the table. He wore a ludicrous yellow overcoat that reached down to his ankles. He was astonished to see me sitting there. Boscan looked even more ill as he introduced us. I have forgotten his name. I said goodbye and went toward the door. Boscan caught up with me. "At Christmas," he said quietly. "I'll see you at Christmas." A postcard. A sepia view of the palace of Queen Maria Pia, Sintra. I will be 1 kilometer west of the main beach at Paco de Arcos. I have rented a room in the Casa de Bizoma. Please arrive at dawn on the 25th of December and depart at sunset. I am your friend, Gaspar Barboza. The bark of the cork tree is removed every 8 to 10 years, the quality of the cork improving with each successive stripping. Once the section of cork is removed from the tree, the outer surface is scraped and cleaned. The sections, wide, curved planks, are flattened by heating them over a fire and submitting them to pressure on a flat surface. In the heating operation, the surface is charred, and thereby the pores are closed up. It is this process that the industry terms the nerve of cork. This is cork at its most valuable. A cork possesses nerve when its significant properties, lightness, impermeability, elasticity, are sealed in the material forever. Consul Schenk's report. In the serene Uranus light of dawn, the beach at Paco de Arcos looked slate-grey. The seaside cafes were closed up and summoned up impressions of dejection and decrepitude as only out-of-season holiday resorts can. To add to this melancholy scene, a fine, cold rain blew off the Atlantic. I stood beneath my umbrella on the coast road and looked about me. To the right, the hills of Sintra were shrouded in a heavy, opaque mist. I turned and walked up the road towards the Casa de Bizoma. As I drew near, I could see Boscan sitting on a balcony on the second floor. All other windows on this side of the hotel were firmly shuttered. A young girl of about 16 years let me in and led me up to his room. Boscan was wearing a monocle. On a table behind him were 2 bottles of brandy. We kissed, we broke apart. "Lise," he said. "I want to call you Lise." Even then, even that day, I said no. "That's the whole point," I reminded him. "I'm me, Lily, whoever you are." He inclined his body forward in a mock bow. "Gaspar Barboza. Would you like something to drink?" I drank some brandy, and then allowed Barboza to undress me, which he did with pedantic diligence and great delicacy. When I was naked, he knelt before me and pressed his lips against my groin, burying his nose in my pubic hair. He hugged me, still kneeling, his arms strong around the backs of my thighs, his head turned sideways in my lap. When he began to cry softly, I raised him up and led him over to the narrow bed. He undressed, and we climbed in, huddling up together, our legs interlocking. I reached down to touch him. "I don't know what's wrong," he said. I don't know." "Well, wait. Don't forget, you have to go at sunset. Remember." "I won't." We made love later, but it was not very satisfactory. He seemed listless and tired. Nothing like Balthazar Cabral or Melchior Vasconcelos. At noon the hotel restaurant was closed, so we ate a simple lunch he had brought himself, some bread, some olives, some tart sheep's milk cheese, some oranges and almonds. By then he was on to the second bottle of brandy. After lunch I smoked a cigarette. I offered him one. I had noticed he had not smoked all day, which he accepted, but which he extinguished after a couple of puffs. "I have developed a mysterious distaste for tobacco," he said, pouring himself some more brandy. In the afternoon we tried to make love again, but failed. "It's my fault," he said. "I'm not well." I asked him why I had had to arrive at dawn and why I had to leave at sunset. He told me it was because of a poem he had written called "The Roses of the Gardens of the God Adonis." "You wrote? Boscan?" No. Boscan has only written one book of poems years ago. These are mine, Gaspar Barboza's. "What's it about?" The light was going. It was time for me to leave. Oh, he thought, living and dying. He quoted me the line that explained the truncated nature of my third Christmas with Agostino Boscan. He sat at the table before the window, wearing a dirty white shirt and the trousers of his blue serge suit, and poured himself a tumblerful of brandy. It goes like this, roughly, I'm translating. Let us make our lives last one day, he said. So there is night before and night after the little that we last. The uses to which corkwood may be put are unlimited, and yet when we speak of uses, it is only those that have developed by reason of the corkwood's own peculiarity, and not the great number it has been adapted to. For perhaps its utility will have no end, and, in my estimation, its particular qualities are little appreciated. At any rate, it is the most wonderful bark of its kind. Its service has been a long one, and its benefits, even as a stopper, have been many. A wonderful material, truly, and of interest so full that it seems I have failed to do it justice in my humble endeavour to describe the Quercus suber of Linnaeus. Cork. Consul Schenk's report. Boscan, during, I think, that last Christmas. You see, because I am nothing, I can imagine anything. If I were something, I would be unable to imagine. It was in early December 1936 that I received my last communication from Agostino Boscan. I was waiting to hear from him, as I had received an offer for the company from the Armstrong Cork Company, and was contemplating a sale and possibly a return to England. I was in my office one morning when Pimentel knocked on the door and said there was a Signora Boscan to see me. For an absurd, exquisite moment, I thought this might prove to be Agostino's most singular disguise, but remembered he had 3 sisters and a mother still living. I knew before she was shown in that she came with news of Boscan's death. Signora Boscan was small and tubby, with a meek, pale face. She wore black and fiddled constantly with the handle of her umbrella as she spoke. Her brother had requested specifically that I be informed of his death when it arrived. He had passed away 2 nights ago. What did he die of? Cirrhosis of the liver. My brother had become an increasingly heavy drinker. He was very unhappy. Was there anything else for me that he said, any message? Signora Boscan cleared her throat and blinked. There is no message. I'm sorry. That is what he asked me to say. There is no message. Ah. I managed to disguise my smile by offering Signora Boscan a cup of coffee. She accepted. We all miss him, she said. Such a good, quiet man. From an obituary of Agostino da Silva Boscan. Boscan was born in 1888 in Durban, South Africa, where his father was Portuguese consul. He was the youngest of 4 children, the 3 elder being sisters. It was in South Africa that he received a British education and where he learned to speak English. Boscan's father died when he was 17, and the family returned to Lisbon, where Boscan was to reside for the rest of his life. He worked primarily as a commercial translator and office manager for various industrial concerns, but mainly in the cork business. In 1916, he published a small collection of poems, Insensível, written in English. The one Portuguese critic who noticed them, and who wrote a short review, described them as a sad waste. Boscan was active for a while in Lisbon literary circles, and would occasionally publish poems, translations, and articles in the magazine Sombra. The death of his closest friend, Xavier Quevedo, who committed suicide in Paris in 1924, provoked a marked and sudden change in his personality, which became increasingly melancholic and irrational from then on. He never married. His life can only be described as uneventful. Loose continuity. I am standing on the corner of Westwood and Wilshire, just down from the Mobile gas station, waiting. There is a coolish breeze just managing to blow from somewhere, and I'm glad of it. 9 o'clock in the morning, and it's going to be another hot one for sure. For the third or fourth time I needlessly go over and inspect the concrete foundation, noting again that the power lines have been properly installed, that the extra bolts I've requested are duly there. Where is everybody? I look at my watch, light another cigarette, and begin to grow vaguely worried. Have I picked the wrong day? Has my accent confused Mr. Koenig? He is always asking me to repeat myself. A bright curtain, blues and ochres, boils and billows from an apartment window across the street. It sets a forgotten corner of my mind working. Who had drapes like that once? Who owned a skirt that was similar, or perhaps a tie? A klaxon honks down Wilshire, and I look up to see Spencer driving the crane, pulling slowly across 2 lanes of traffic and coming to a halt at the curb. He swings down from the cab and takes off his cap. His hair is getting longer, losing that army crop. "Sorry I'm late, Miss Velk. The depot was, well, you know, crazy, impossible. Doesn't matter. It's not here anyway." "Yeah, right." Spencer moves over and crouches down at the concrete plinth, checking the power line connection, touching and jiggling the bolts in their brackets. He goes around the back of the crane and sets out the wooden "Men at Work" signs, then reaches into his pocket and hands me a crumpled sheet of flimsy. "The permit," he explains. "We got till noon." "Even on a Sunday?" "Even on a Sunday. Even in Los Angeles." He shrugs. "Even in 1945. Don't worry, Miss Velk. We got plenty of time." I turn away, a little exasperated. "As long as it gets here," I say with futile determination, as if I had the power to threaten. The drape streams out of the window suddenly like a banner and catches the sun. Then I remember, like the wall-hanging Uta had done, the one that Tobias bought. Spencer asks me if he should go phone the factory, but I say give them an extra half hour. I am remembering another Sunday morning, sunny like this one, but not as hot, and half the world away. And I can see myself walking up Grillparzerstrasse, taking the short-cut from the station, my suitcase heavy in my hand, and hoping, wondering, now that I have managed to catch the dawn train from Sorrow, if Tobias will be able to find some time to see me alone that afternoon. Gudrun Velk walked slowly up Grillparzerstrasse, enjoying the sun, her body canted over to counterbalance the weight of her suitcase. She was wearing... what was I wearing? She was wearing baggy cotton trousers with the elasticated cuffs at the ankles, a sky-blue blouse and an embroidered felt jacket with a motif of jousters and strutting chargers. Her fair hair was down and she wore no makeup. She was thinking about Tobias, and whether they might see each other that day, or whether they might make love. Thinking about Uta, if she would be up by now. Thinking about the 2 thick skeins of still damp blue wool in her suitcase, wool that she had dyed herself late the night before at the mill in Sorau, and that she felt sure would finish her rug perfectly, and, most importantly, in a manner that would please Paul. Paul came to the weaving workshop often. Small, with dull olive skin and large eyes below a high forehead, eyes seemingly brimming with unshed tears. He quietly moved from loom to loom, and the weavers would slip out of their seats to let him have an unobstructed view. Gudrun had started her big knotted rug, and he stood in front of it for some minutes, silently contemplating the first squares and circles. She waited. Sometimes he looked, said nothing, and moved on. "Now, though," he said, "I like the shapes, but the yellow is wrong. It needs more lemon, especially set beside that peach color." He shrugged, adding, "in my opinion." That was when she started to go to his classes on color theory and unpicked the work she had done and began again. She told him, "I'm weaving my rug based on your chromatic principles." He was pleased, she thought. He said politely that in that case he would follow its progress with particular interest. He was not happy at the Institute, she knew. Since Meyer had taken over, the mood had changed, was turning against Paul and the other painters. Meyer was against them, she had been told. He felt they smacked of Weimar, the bad old days. Tobias was the same. Bogus advertising theatricalism, he would state. We should have left all that behind. What the painters did was decorative. Need one say more? So Paul was gratified to find someone who responded to his theories instead of mocking them. And in any case, the mood in the weaving workshops was different, what with all the young women. There was a joke in the Institute that the women revered him, called him the dear Lord. He did enjoy the time he spent there, he told Gudrun later. Of all the workshops, it was the weavers he would miss most, he said. If the day came for him to leave, all the girls, all the bright young women. Spencer leans against the pole that holds the power lines. The sleeve of his check shirt falls back to reveal more of his burned arm. It looks pink and new and oddly finely ridged, like bark or like the skin you get on hot milk as it cools. He taps a rhythm on the creosoted pole with his thumb and the two remaining fingers on his left hand. I know the burn goes the length of his arm and then some more, but the hand has taken the full brunt. He turns and sees me staring. "How's the arm?" I say. "I got another graft next week. We're getting there, slow but sure." "What about this heat? Does it make it worse?" "Doesn't help, but I'd rather be here than Okinawa," he says. "Damn right." "Of course," I say. "Of course. Yeah." He exhales and seems on the point of saying something. He's talking more about the war these days, about his injury, when his eye is caught. He straightens. He says. "Looks like Mr. Koenig is here." Uta Benrath had dark orange hair, strongly hennaed, which, with her green eyes, made her look foreign to Gudrun, but excitingly so, as if she were a half-breed of some impossible sort, Irish and Malay, Swedish and Peruvian. She was small and wiry, and used her hands expressively when she spoke, fists unclenching slowly like a flower opening, or thrusting, palming movements, her fingers always flexing. Her voice was deep, and she had a throaty man's chuckle, like a hint of wicked fun. Gudrun met her when she had answered the advertisement Uta had placed on the notice board in the students' canteen. Room to rent, share facilities and expenses. When Gudrun began her affair with Tobias, she realized she had to move out of the hostel she was staying in. The room in Uta's apartment was cheap, and not just because the apartment was small and had no bathroom. It was inconvenient as well. Uta, it turned out, lived a brisk 45-minute walk from the Institute. The apartment was on the top floor of a tenement building on Grenzweg, out in Units, with a distant view of a turgid loop of the Mulde from the kitchen window. The place was clean and simply furnished. On the walls hung brightly coloured designs for stained-glass windows that Uta had drawn in Weimar. She was older than Gudrun, in her early 30s, Gudrun guessed, but her unusual colouring made her age seem almost an irrelevance. She looked so unlike anyone Gudrun had seen before that age seemed to have little or nothing to do with the impression she made. There were 2 bedrooms in the apartment on Grenzweg, a small kitchen with a stove and a surprisingly generous hall where Uta and Gudrun would eat their meals around a square scrub pine table. They washed in the kitchen, standing on a towel in front of the sink. They carried their chamber pots down 4 flights of stairs and emptied them in the night soil cistern at the rear of the small yard behind the apartment building. Gudrun developed a strong affection for their 4 rooms. Her bedroom was the first of her own outside of her parents' house. It was the first proper home of her adult life. Most evenings she and Uta prepared their meal, sausage 9 times out of 10 with potatoes or turnips, and then, if they were not going out, they would sit on the bed in Uta's room and listen to music on her phonograph. Uta would read or write. She was studying architecture by correspondence course, and they would talk. Uta's concentration, Gudrun soon noticed, her need for further credentials, her ambitions, were motivated by a pessimistic obsession about her position at the Institute, to which the conversation inevitably returned. She told Gudrun she was convinced that the mural painting workshop was to be closed and she would have to leave. She adduced evidence, clues, hints, that she was sure proved that this was Maya's intention. Look what had happened to stained glass, she said, to the wood and stone carving woodshops. The struggle it had been to transfer had almost finished her off. That's why she wanted to be an architect. Everything had to be practical these days, manufactured. Productivity was the new god. But it took so long, and if they closed the mural painting workshop, nothing Gudrun said could reassure her. All Utta's energies were devoted to finding a way to stay on. "I've heard that Marion Brandt hates Maya," she reported one night with excitement, almost glee. "No, I mean really hates him. She detests him. She's going to resign, I know it." "Maybe Maya will go first," Gudrun said. "He's so unpopular. It can't be nice for him." Utta laughed, and laughed again. "Sweet Gudrun," she said, and reached out and patted her foot. "Never change." "But why should it affect you?" Gudrun asked. "Marianne runs the metal workshop." "Exactly," Utta said with a small smile. "Don't you see? That means there'll be a vacancy, won't there?" Mr. Koenig steps out of his car and wrinkles his eyes at the sun. Mrs. Koenig waits patiently until he comes around and opens the door for her. Everyone shakes hands. "Bet you're glad you're not in Okinawa, eh, Spence?" Mr. Koenig says. "Far from heaven, I hear," Spencer says with some emotion. "Oh, yeah, well, whatever." Mr. Koenig turns to me. "How are we doing, Miss Velk?" "Running a bit late," I say. "Maybe in 1 hour if you come back." He looks at his watch, then his wife. "What do you say to some breakfast, Mrs. Koenig?" Tobias likes to be naked. He likes to move around his house doing ordinary things naked. Once, when his wife was away, he had cooked Gudrun a meal and asked her to eat it with him, naked. They ate thick slices of smoked ham, she remembered, with a pungent radish sauce. They sat in his dining room and ate and chatted as if all were perfectly normal. Gudrun realized that it aroused him sexually, that it was a prelude to love-making. But she began to feel cold, and before he served the salad, she asked if she could go and put on her sweater. Tobias Henze was one of the 3 masters of form who ran the architecture workshop. He was a big, burly man who would become seriously fat in a few years, Gudrun realized. His body was covered with a pelt of fine, dark hair, almost like an animal's. It grew thickly on his chest and belly, and, curiously, in the small of his back. But his whole body, his buttocks, his shoulders, was covered with this fine, glossy fur. At first she thought she would find it repugnant, but it was soft, not wiry. And now, when they were in bed, she often discovered herself absent-mindedly stroking him, as if he were a great cat or a bear, as if he were a rug she could pull around her. They met at the New Year's party in 1928, where the theme was white. Tobias had gone as a grotesque, padded Pierrot, a white cone on his head, his face a mask of white grease paint. Gudrun had been a colonialist, in a man's white suit with a white shirt and tie, and her hair up under a solar topee. By the party's end, well into January the 1st, she had gone into an upstairs lavatory to untie her tight bun, vaguely hoping that loosening her hair would ease her headache. Her hair was longer then, falling to her shoulders, and as she came down the stairs to the main hall, she saw, sitting on a landing, Tobias, a large, rumpled, clearly drunken Pierrot, smoking a dark, novel cigar. He watched her descend, a little amazed, it seemed, blinking as if to clear some obstruction to his vision. She stepped over his leg. She knew who he was. "Hey, you!" he shouted after her. "I didn't know you were a woman." His tone was affronted, aggressive, as if she had deliberately misled him. She did not look around. The day the new term began, he came to the weaving workshop to find her. I take my last cigarette from the pack and light it. I sit on the step below the cab of Spencer's crane, where there's some shade. I see Spencer coming briskly along the sidewalk from the payphone. He's a stocky man, not small, but with a stocky man's vigorous rolling stride, as if the air were crowding him, and he's shouldering it away, forcing his passage through. "They say it left an hour ago." He shrugged. "Must be some problem on the highway." "Wonderful." I blow smoke into the sky loudly to show my exasperation. "Can I bum one of those off you?" I show him the empty pack. "Lucky strike." He shrugs. "I don't like them anyway. I like the name. That's why I smoked them." He looks at me. "Yeah, where do they get the names for those packs? Who makes them up? I ask you." "Camel. Yeah," he says. "Why a camel? Do camels smoke? Why not a hippo? I ask you." I laugh. "A pack of hippos, please." He grins and cuffs the headlamp Nathalie. He makes it sound and shakes his head incredulously. He looks back at me. "Goddamn factory. Must be something on the highway. Can I buy you some breakfast, Spencer?" Paul met Tobias only once in Gudrun's company. It was one afternoon at 4 o'clock, when the workshops closed. The weavers worked 4 hours in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. The workshop was empty. The big rug was half done, pinned up on an easel in the middle of the room. Paul stood in front of it, the fingers of his right hand slowly stroking his chin, looking, thinking. From time to time he would cover his left eye with his left palm. "I like it, Gudrun," he said finally. "I like its warmth and clarity, the color penetration, the orangey pinks, the lemons. What's going to happen at the bottom?" "I think I'm going to shade into green and blue." "What's that black?" "I'm going to have some bars, some vertical, one horizontal, with the cold colors." He nodded and stepped back. Gudrun, who had been standing behind him, moved to one side to allow him a longer view. As she turned, she saw Tobias had come into the room and was watching them. Tobias sauntered over and greeted Paul coolly and with formality. "I came to admire the rug," Paul said. "It's splendid, no?" Tobias glanced at it. "Very decorative," he said. "You should be designing wallpaper, Miss Felk, not wasting your time with this." He turned to Paul. "Don't you agree?" "Ah, popular necessities before elitist luxuries," Paul said, wagging a warning finger at her briefly. The sarcasm sounded most strange coming from him, Gudrun thought. "It's a way of putting it," Tobias said. "Indeed." We sit in a window of a coffee shop in Westwood Village. I've ordered a coffee in Danish, but Spencer has decided to go for something more substantial, a ribeye steak with fried egg. "Hope the Koenigs don't come back," Spencer says. "Maybe I shouldn't have ordered the steak." I press my cheek against the warm glass of the window. I can just see the back end of Spencer's crane. "I'll spot them," I say, "and I'll see the truck from the factory. You eat up." Spencer runs his finger along the curved aluminum beading that finishes the table edge. "I want you to know, Miss Felk, how grateful I am for the work you put my way." He looks me in the eye. "More than grateful." "No, it is I who am grateful to you. No, I appreciate what you—" His steak comes and puts an end to what I'm sure would have been long protestations of mutual gratitude. It's too hot to eat pastry, so I push my Danish aside and wonder where I can buy some more cigarettes. Spencer, holding his fork like a dagger in his injured left hand, stabs it into his steak to keep it steady on the plate, and, with a knife in his right, sets about trying to saw the meat into pieces. He is having difficulty. His thumb and 2 fingers can't keep a good grip on the fork handle, and he saws with the knife awkwardly. "Damn thing is I'm left-handed," he says, sensing my watching. He works off a small corner, pops it into his mouth, and then starts the whole pinioning, slicing operation again. The plate slides across the shiny tabletop and collides with my coffee mug. A small splash flips out. "Sorry," he says. "Could I do that for you?" I say. "Would it bother you?" He says nothing, and I reach out and gently take the knife and fork from him. I cut the steak into cubes and hand back the knife and fork. "Thank you, Miss Felk." "Please call me Gudrun," I say. "Thank you, Gudrun." Gudrun, over here." Uta beckoned her from the doorway of Tobias's kitchen. Gudrun moved with difficulty through the crowd of people, finding a gap here, skirting around an expansive gesture there. Utter drew her into the kitchen, where there was still quite a mob of people, and refilled Gudrun's glass with punch and then her own. Utter drew her into the kitchen, where there was still quite a mob of people, and refilled Gudrun's glass with punch and then her own. They clinked glasses. "I give you Marianne Brandt," Utter said. She smiled. "What do you mean?" "She's resigned." "What happened? Who told you?" Utter inclined her head toward the window. "Irene," she said. Standing by the sink talking to three young men was Irene Henze, Tobias's wife. Gudrun had not seen her there. She had arrived at the party late, uneasy at the thought of being in Tobias's house, meeting his wife and other guests. Tobias had assured her that Irene knew nothing. Irene was ignorance personified, he said, the quintessence of ignorance. Utter carried on talking, as Gudrun covertly scrutinized her hostess, hearing some business about amalgamation, about metal, joinery and mural painting, all being coordinated into a new workshop of interior design. Irene did not look like an ignorant woman, she thought. She looked like a woman brimful of knowledge. "I told you it would happen. Aunt's going to run it. But Marianne's refused to continue," Utter was saying, but Gudrun did not listen further. Irene Henze was tall and thin. She had a sharp, long face with hooded, sleepy eyes, and wore a loose black gown that seemed oddly Eastern in design. To Gudrun she appeared almost ugly, and yet she seemed to have gathered within her a languid, self-confident calm and serenity. The students laughed at something she said, and she left them with a flick of her wrist, making them laugh again, picking up a plate of canapes and beginning to offer them around to the other guests standing and chatting in the kitchen. She drifted toward Utter and Gudrun, closer, a smile and word for everyone. "I have to go," Gudrun said, and left. Utter caught up with her in the hall, where she was putting on her coat. "What's happening? Where are you going?" "Home. I don't feel well." "But I want you to talk to Tobias. Find out more. They need a new assistant now. If Tobias could mention my name to Maya, just a mention." Gudrun felt a genuine nausea and simultaneously, inexplicably, infuriatingly, an urge to cry. Spencer frowns worriedly at me. I look at my watch. Mr. Koenig looks at his watch also, and simultaneously the truck from the factory in Oxnard rumbles up Wilshire. Apologies are offered. The delays on the highway blamed. Who would have thought there could be so much traffic on a Sunday? And Spencer maneuvers the crane into position. Tobias ran his fingertips down her back to the cleft in her buttocks. "So smooth," he said. He turned her over and nuzzled her breasts, taking her hand and pulling it down to his groin. "Utter will be home soon," she said. Tobias groaned. He heaved himself up on his elbows and looked down at her. "I can't stand this," he said. "You have to get a place of your own, and not so damn far away." "Oh, yes, of course," Gudrun said. "I'll get a little apartment on Kavalierstrasse. So convenient and so reasonable." "I'm going to miss you," he said. "What am I going to do? Dear Christ." Gudrun had told him she was going to take the dyeing course at Sorau. They met regularly now, almost as a matter of routine, 3, sometimes 4 times a week in the afternoon at the apartment on Grenzweg. The weaving workshop closed earlier than the other departments in the institute, and between 4:30 and 6:30 in the afternoons they had the flat to themselves. Utter would obligingly stop for a coffee or shop on her way home, dawdling for the sake of love, as she described it, and usually Tobias was gone by the time she returned. On the occasions they met he seemed quite indifferent, quite unperturbed at being seen. Now, if Utter was the new head of the metal workshop, Gudrun said, I am sure she'd be much more busy than— "Don't start that again," Tobias said. "I've spoken to Maya. Aunt has his own candidates. You know she has a fair chance, a more than fair chance." He put his arms around her and squeezed her strongly to him. "Gudrun, my Gudrun," he exclaimed, as if mystified by this emotion within him. Why do I want you so? Why?" They heard the rattle of Utta's key in the lock, her steps as she crossed the hall into the kitchen. When Tobias left, Utta came immediately to Gudrun's room. She was dressing, but the bed was still a mess of rumpled sheets, which for some reason made Gudrun embarrassed. To her the room seemed to reek of Tobias. She pulled the blanket up to the pillow. "Did he see you when he left?" Gudrun asked. "No, I was in my room. Did he say anything?" "Same as usual. No, a more than fair chance," he said. "He said Aunt has his own candidates." "Of course, but a more than fair chance, that's something, yes. But I can't do anything more. I think I should stop asking. Why don't you see Maya yourself?" No, it's not the way it works here. You don't understand. It never has. You have to play it differently, and you must never give up." Spencer checks that the canvas webbing is properly secured under the base, jumps down from the truck, and climbs up to the small control platform beside the crane. I remind Mr. Koenig, "It's manufactured in 3 parts. The whole thing can be assembled quickly. It's painted, finished. We connect the power supply and you're in business." Mr. Koenig was visibly moved. "It's incredible," he said. "Just like that." I turn to Spencer and give him a thumbs up. There's a thin puff of bluey-grey smoke, and the crane's motor chugs into life. Tobias sat on the edge of his desk, one leg swinging. He reached out to take Gudrun's hand and gently pulled her into the V of his thighs. He kissed her neck and inhaled, smelling her skin, her hair, as if he were trying to draw her essence deep into his lungs. "I want us to go away for a weekend," he said. "Let's go to Berlin." She kissed him. "I can't afford it." "I'll pay," he said. "I'll think of something, some crucial meeting." She felt his hands on her buttocks. His thighs gently clamped hers. Through the wall of his office she could hear male voices from one of the drawing rooms. She pushed herself away from him and strolled over to the tilted drawing table that was set before the window. "A weekend in Berlin," she said. "I like the sound of that. I must—" She turned as the door opened, and Irene Henze walked in. "Tobias, we're late," she said, glancing at Gudrun with a faint smile. Tobias sat on, one free leg swinging slightly. "You know Miss Welk, don't you?" "I don't think so. How are you?" Somehow Gudrun managed to extend her arm. She felt the slight pressure of dry, cool fingers. A pleasure. "She was at the party," Tobias said. "Surely you met." "Darling, there were 100 people at the party." "I won't disturb you further," Gudrun said, moving to the door. "Very good to meet you." "Oh, Miss Welk!" Tobias's call stopped her. She turned carefully to see Irene bent over the drawing table, scrutinizing the blueprint there. "Don't forget our appointment. 4:30 as usual." He smiled at her, glanced over to make sure his wife was not observing, and blew her a kiss. At the edge of a wood of silver birches behind the institute was a small meadow where in summer the students would go and sunbathe. And at the meadow's edge a stream ran, thick with willows and alders. The pastoral mood was regularly dispelled, however, and Gudrun wondered if this was why it was so popular with students, by the roaring noise of aeroplanes. The trimotors that were tested at the Junkers Flugplatz, just beyond the pine trees to the west, would bank around and fly low over the meadow as they made their landing approaches. In the summer, the pilots would wave to the sunbathing students below. Gudrun walked down the path through the birchwood, still trembling, still hot from the memory of Tobias's audacity, his huge composure. She was surprised to see, coming up from the meadow, Paul. He was carrying a pair of binoculars in his hand. He saw her and waved. "I like to look at the aeroplanes," he said. "In the war I used to work at an airfield, you know, painting camouflage. Wonderful machines." She had a flask of coffee with her and spontaneously offered to share it with him. She needed some company, she felt, some genial distraction. They found a place by the stream, and she poured coffee into the tin cup that doubled as the flask's top. She had some bread and 2 hard-boiled eggs, which she ate as Paul drank the coffee. Then he filled his pipe and smoked, while she told him about the dyeing course at Sorau. He said he thought she needed a more intense blue to finish her rug, something hard and metallic, and suggested she might be able to concoct the right colour at the dye works. "With Tobias," he said suddenly to her surprise, "when you're with Tobias, are you happy?" He waved aside her denials and queries. Everyone knew about it, he told her. Such a thing could not be done discreetly in a place like the Institute. She need not answer if she did not want to, but he was curious. Yes, she said, she was very happy with Tobias. They were both happy. She said boldly that she thought she was in love with him. Paul listened. He told her that Tobias was a powerful figure in the architecture school, that all power in the Institute emanated from the architecture workshop. He would not be surprised, he said, if one day Tobias ended up running the whole place. He rose to his feet, tapped out his pipe on the trunk of a willow, and they wandered back through the birchwood. "I just wanted you to be aware about this," he said. "About Tobias." He smiled at her. "He's an intriguing man." His features were small beneath his wide, pale brow, as if crushed and squashed slightly by his weight. There were bags under his eyes, she noticed. He looked tired. "You're like a meteor," he said. "Suddenly you're attracted by the earth and are drawn into its atmosphere. At this moment you become a shooting star, incandescent and beautiful. There are two options available: to be tied to the earth's atmosphere and plummet, or to escape, moving back out into space." She was baffled at first, but then remembered he was quoting from his own courses, something she had heard in his classes, where you slowly cool down and eventually extinguish. "The point is, you need not plummet," he said carefully. "There are different laws in different atmospheres, freer movements, freer dynamics. It need not be rigid." "Loose continuity," she said. "I remember." "Precisely," he said with a smile. "There's a choice, rigid or loose continuity." He tapped her arm lightly. "Do you know, I think I may be interested in buying your rug." Spencer tightens the final bolt and crosses the street to join us on the opposite sidewalk. Mr. Koenig, Mrs. Koenig, Spencer, and me. It is almost midday, and the sun is almost insupportably bright. I put on my sunglasses, and through the green glass I stare at the Koenig's mini diner. Mr. Koenig turns away and takes a few paces, his finger held under his nose as if he were about to sneeze. He comes back to us. "I love it, Miss Velk," he says, after apologizing for the few private moments he has needed. It's so... the way you've done those jutting out bits. My God, it even looks like a sandwich. The roll, the meat, so clever, so new. How it curves like that, that style. Streamline moderne, we call it. May I?" He puts his hands on my shoulders and leans forward and up. I am a little taller, and he gives me a swift kiss on the cheek. I don't normally kiss architects. "Oh, I'm not an architect," I say. "I'm just a designer." It was a challenge. Gudrun never really knew what happened. But this is what I think. I'm sure it was like this. As the stories changed so often in the telling, there were lies and half-lies all the time. The truth made both guilty parties more guilty, and they thought to absolve themselves by pleading spontaneity and helpless instinct. But they had no time to compare notes, and the discrepancies hinted at quite another version of reality. Gudrun climbed the last block from the station and quietly opened the door of the apartment on Grenzweg. It must have been a little before 8 o'clock in the morning. She had gone a few steps into the hall when she heard a sound in the kitchen. She pushed open the door, and Tobias stood there, naked, with 2 cups of steaming coffee in his hands. His look of awful incomprehension changing to awful comprehension lasted no more than a second. He smiled, set down the cup, said, "Gudrun," and was interrupted by Utta's call from her bedroom. "Tobias, where's that coffee, for heaven's sake?" Gudrun, to this day, doesn't know why she did what she did. She picked up a coffee cup and walked into Utta's room. She wanted Utter to see that there was to be no evasion of responsibility. Utter was sitting up in her bed, pillows plump behind her, a sheet to her waist. Tobias's clothes were piled untidily on a wooden chair. She made a kind of sick, choking noise when Gudrun came in. For a moment Gudrun thought of throwing the hot coffee at her, but at that stage she knew there were only seconds before she herself would break, so, after a moment of standing there to make Utter see, to make her know, she dropped the cup on the floor and left the apartment. 2 days later Tobias asked Gudrun to marry him. He said he had gone to the apartment on Saturday night, his wife was away, thinking that was the day she was returning from Sorau. Once, in his stream of protestations, he had inadvertently referred to a note. "I mean, what would you think, a note like that?" And then, when questioned, "What note? Who sent you a note?" said he was becoming confused. No, there was no note. He had meant to say she should have sent him a note from Sorau, not relied on him to remember. How could he remember everything, for God's sweet sake? Utter. Utter had written to him, Gudrun surmised, perhaps in her name, the better to lure him. "Darling Tobias, I'm coming home a day early. Meet me at the apartment on Saturday night. Your own Gudrun." It would work easily. Utter there, surprised to see him. "Come in, sit down. Now you're here, come all this way. Something to drink, some wine, some schnapps maybe." And Tobias's vanity, Tobias's opportunism, and Tobias's weakness would do the rest. Now, darling Tobias, this question of Marianne Brandt's resignation. In weary moments, though, other possibilities presented themselves to her. Older duplicities, histories, and motives she could never have known about or wouldn't want to contemplate. Her own theory was easier to live with. Utter wrote her a letter. No idea how it happened, some madness that can infect us all, an act of no meaning, of momentary release. She was sad to lose Utter as a friend, but not so sad to turn down Tobias's proposal of marriage. I say good-bye to Spencer as he sits in the cab of his crane looking down at me. "See you tomorrow, Gudrun," he says, with a smile, to my vague surprise, until I remember I had asked him to call me Gudrun. He drives away, and I rejoin Mr. Koenig. "I got one question," he says. "I mean, I love the lettering, don't get me wrong, sandwiches, salads, hot dogs, but why no capital letters?" "Well," I said without thinking, "why write with capitals where we don't speak with capitals?" Mr. Koenig frowns. "What? Yeah, it's a fair point. Never thought of it that way. Yeah." My mind begins to wander again as Mr. Koenig starts to put a proposition to me. Who said that about typography? Was it Albert? Paul? No, Moholy-Nagy. Laszlo in his red overalls with his lumpy boxer's face and his intellectual spectacles. He's in Chicago now. We're all gone, I think to myself, all scattered. Mr. Koenig is telling me there are 15 Koenig mini-diners in the Los Angeles area, and he would like, he hopes, he wonders if it would be possible for me to redesign them, all of them, in this streamline, modern, streamline sort of style. All scattered. Freer movements, freer dynamics. I remember and smile to myself. I had never imagined a future designing hot dog stands in a city on the west coast of America. It is a kind of continuity, I suppose. We need not plumb it. Paul would approve of me and what I have done, I think, as a vindication of his principle. I hear myself accepting Mr. Koenig's offer and allow him to kiss me on the cheek once more. But my mind is off once again, a continent and an ocean away in drab and misty Dessau. Gudrun Welk is trudging up the gentle slope of Grillparzer, her suitcase heavy in her hand, taking the short-cut from the station, heading back to the small apartment on Grenzweg, which he shares with her friend Uta Benrath, and hoping, wondering, now that she has managed to catch an early train from Sorau, if Tobias would have some time to see her alone that afternoon. This concludes the reading of The Destiny of Nathalie X and Other Stories by William Boyd. This book was read by Ian Whitcomb.